Recording starting. All right, can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right, thank you everyone. So those questions were interesting actually. So there'll be a lot of things that we'll touch on that will even hit on your responses, and I think address some of the questions that you already have. But what we want to do today, we want to talk to you about our views to start off with on the robot-human collaboration that is growing, what we see people doing today, why it's so important to us as a company. I'll spend some time talking to you about the key themes you should be considering when designing more user-friendly attended automations. And my colleague Juan is actually going to walk you through a new way of building attended automations using some very exciting features that will address performance and those other challenges that that you mentioned in the poll. Finally, we don't just tell, we also show and tell. So we'll round out this dev dives with a demonstration of capabilities, and we'll leave some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, so just to spend a few minutes talking about why this is important to us. So UiPath being a very automation-centric company, of course, automation is important to us, but we believe everyone in an organization should really be benefiting from this increase in automation that we're seeing. We also consider both automation consumption by end users and democratized development by more and more RPA developers, automation developers is critical to achieving the full potential of an automated enterprise. What we're going to focus in on or narrow in on today is that we want users to not just be more comfortable, be more familiar with automation and what something like robotic process automation is, but actually be more directly engaged with it on a regular basis. That means that we need to create very engaging, more user-friendly automations, user experiences that enable those users to work really side by side with the robot to do their day-to-day task or their week-to-week task. And that's how we get to this central vision of a robot for every person in the company. So before we dive deeper into how we do it or how we recommend you create these more engaging user experiences, let's just talk about what the employees today are expecting and how they're currently thinking about automation. So recently we ran a survey of about 500 plus workers. And what we found is that almost 90% of them, or 86% exactly, of those surveyed said they are willing to use automation in the future. 79% say they are very comfortable with automation. So the short story is really that users are not afraid of robots. They already want to use them. So the big question that's remaining is how do we actually build what they are already looking to use? So 86% that I just mentioned, it's a very good number, but it's not 100%. And we want to raise the bar always. There'll always be some resistance in making attended automations that are user-friendly and engaging. It's not going to really be a one-time thing that you need to do. So to start, your users will have the question, for this automation, what you're trying to do, is it really relevant to me? There may be a gap between their expectations as well and the reality of what you're producing. And that can come from some very simple things, simple as how you name the automation, right? The way that they see it when it comes to them. So we generally are bucketing all of those different concerns into the area of functionality. And then next, not that it's less important, for many of you will be equally, if not more important for your end users, but the user experience. So the question is it hard for me to use? And the bar here is not really a comparison to other attended automations that you may have seen or other attended automations that you're looking to develop. The bar is all the other digital applications that they're interacting with on a daily basis where they may have a really good and pleasant user experience, you want to make sure that your attended automations are at least as good, if not better, than the experience that they're getting with those other applications. Next is performance. So this is where I think a lot of developers can actually relate because we, just like end users, don't like to wait for different code to run or things to execute. So one of the major considerations you'll have to think through is how long will an automation take? Is it fast enough? Can I still use my computer, or is it actually blocking? And related to this is actually the issue of perceived performance as well. So it's one thing for an automation to only take 10 seconds. It's another thing for a user to not know what's happening during that 10 seconds and actually start to feel that it's a very slow process of slow automation. And lastly, there is the program or programmatic considerations. So everybody's going to implement their program a little bit different, but it's important to ask the key questions about whatever people are doing, and really try and build as much as you can into the tool or the program itself to let people know what types of automations are out there, who they should contact when they need support. Okay, so just diving deeper into each one of these, we start with functionality because honestly, if it does not work, if it does not function appropriately, then everything else really becomes moot. So for each one of these different techniques or themes, we have three separate sub-themes. So in this case, we start with making it relevant. So this might sound very intuitive, but the important thing for you to know or walk away with is that it's not a one-time consideration. You really have to dive deep, understand who will use an automation, review that usage on a regular basis, and really make frequent improvements. Also, I would not consider all of your users to be a monolith, right? Different sub-users may need to use or may decide to use the tool a little bit differently. The next thing we talk about is consolidate but modulate. So this is not really just a nice catchphrase. What this means is that you have different automations that you might create that you can combine into one different automation by giving the user various different options and settings, right? So the end result of that is that you have fewer automations, less for you to maintain, and less for the user to get used to using, and that helps drive much more value over time. And lastly, make it reliable. So this means minimizing the dependencies. So often you'll have unnecessary third-party utilities, third-party tools that you might be using. You can minimize those. It helps reduce your risk. Automating your test for the remaining risk is certainly very helpful. And then there's really no other way around it, but you have to do extensive validation and error handling for all of the rest of the steps. Right now, next I'll talk about the user experience, which I saw, I think a large number of people in the poll have already deployed 10 attended automations or more. So you probably have a better sense of what your users want, but there's always room to improve the user experience. So even if we just draw from our own experience with different customers or with clients, it really starts from the beginning of a process all the way to when it's ending and you need to confirm different results for the user. So the first thing we do say is guide the user step by step, keep them in the loop throughout. One thing about an attended automation is you may not know when it ends by default. And so to really optimize the time and enable the user more, you'll want to provide some type of notification or confirmation at the end of an automation. Next is really minimizing complexity. So we want to get the users to the aha moment as fast as possible. And that means not having 10, 15, 20 different interactions for them to really get to what they need, or not splitting up the interactions into multiple steps when you can front load them. right? Really trying to get them to that moment as fast as possible, keeping it less complex. They're coming to the attended robot to ideally remove complexity, so we want to minimize as much complexity that we're adding in the process itself. And we want to keep it consistent. So if you can use standardized frameworks, we have a number of them, like the attended framework that are out there. That really helps the end user reduce the cognitive load that they have, as well as using the same types of input patterns. So if you used a dialog box to navigate to open a file in one instance, you wouldn't want to go and use require the user to manually type in C drive slash et cetera, in another instance. So you want to provide those same input patterns, those same similar options, leveraging the different frameworks if you can. Okay, now performance. Performance, which was the number one topic that I saw of concern in that poll. When it comes to user-friendly automations, right, ones that are in user facing, there can be a lot of unique performance requirements, right? So if it's not really user facing, then I may not care if it runs 10 minutes or 15 minutes, especially if it's running overnight in the early morning. But when it's running on my machine, it is very much a different story. So we recommend all the developers think as you're already thinking with that in mind to start off with. So we have a number of different tools that we've released that do help with this. So the workflow analyzer, it really helps you remove excess bulk from the workflow. This will help it start up and run more efficiently. By bulk, I mean things like those unnecessary dependencies that you might not need to leverage. Or the automation profiler, which gives you a sense of where the biggest bottlenecks might be in your process. And then we also recommend everybody use an attended checklist. Now we have ones, for example, in the marketplace, you'll find guidance from other sources as well. But we recommend everybody customize one as they're growing their program and trying to scale it to make sure that what really works best for you when it comes to attended type of performance. The next thing is to establish benchmarks. And again, you could use the automation profiler here, where if you figure out on my ideal machine, how fast does something run, that becomes, and if you find that acceptable, you use that as your benchmark. I could tell you that if you're dealing with a 4 gigabyte machine, a 4 gigabyte environment, it will be substantially different than a 16 or a 32 gigabyte environment. So you want to benchmark those different environments and make sure that your automation really runs well and performant for a wide variety of end users. And then you can also try different approaches, whether it's the use of APIs in some cases with something like integration service, or whether it's different UI automation settings. You can try all of those different things, benchmark the performance for each of them as well. And last, but again, not least, is really managing the user perception. So setting and managing their expectations up front, how long the process might run, what steps it might do, and then providing on a recurring basis those different progress updates so that they know if something's running for 15 seconds or 30 seconds in the background or in a hybrid automation. They know that it's not broken, they know it's not stopped. And that really helps alleviate the end user perception that the automation might not be that performant or slow. All right. Now, the programmatic side of things, or the program side of things, and we have a number of different products that support this: the Automation Hub, Automation Launchpad, Automation Store. The first thing that you really want to consider is driving engagement. So you want to make sure that when you build the automations or starting to build the automations, that you're communicating very well what it's intended to do. Sometimes we just kind of build out the automation and hope for the best. But in this case, what we want to do is communicate effectively beforehand. We want to tell stories and not features. So this means for your successes that you undoubtedly have or will have, you should make sure that you're highlighting the developers, make sure that you're highlighting the end users, right? The value that they maintained, and that really helps drive interest going forward. Really make the end users your champions in particular. Create different enablement material. Again, not just pushing out the automation and hoping for the best, but create the videos, the guides, the FAQs that will accompany that material. Ensure it's up to date. Nobody really likes to update the FAQs or the videos or the guides, but it's really paramount to building trust and making sure that people are able to use the automations as effectively as possible. And lastly, provide the support channels when when all else fails, and that could be something where you use workflows themselves to enable or facilitate support. But you should make sure that either in the automation itself or in the documents that people know who to contact and when. And that really will help you stick with whatever SLAs you set up for these different types of automations. So in summary, we got 4 categories. So we got functionality. First, you got to make sure that it works. Making it relevant is the most important thing, but it's not a one-time thing. It's really iterative. You should consolidate but modulate, reduce the amount of options that you have. So it reduces workload on you, reduces cognitive load on the end user. For the user experience, you want to guide the user through the automation as they're going through it. So give them feedback, give them status updates, notifications, and make sure you're minimizing the overall complexity. Last but not least, just really make sure that it's consistent user experience across different automations. For performance, particularly when you're talking about things running on machines or maybe low-end machines, you want to make sure you're considering how long it will take, how fast something is, compare against different environments, and very importantly, manage the user's perception of performance, right, by providing those status updates and notifications as well. And then programmatically, make sure you're driving engagements by really keeping the end user in mind. Use them as your champions, use them in your stories, and create different enablement materials so they can continue to grow. Make sure you provide the support channels as well. All right, with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Tuan, who will walk you through some of the latest ways of building attended automations.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. Great job. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Tuan Nguyen. I'm Senior Product Manager here at UiPath. I focus on attended automations. Previously, I was Product Manager for the attended framework and the ready to go automations. Before I was at UiPath, I was the citizen developer lead for one of the major customers that had a large attended program within my company. And so I have a lot of experience within attended automation. I'm really excited today to talk a lot about the new capabilities that we're building that are going to be available in GA in 23.4 when it comes to building attended automations. And it's going to address a lot of those problems or challenges that you had answered at the beginning of this session. And so I thought the best way to actually walk through what some of these capabilities could do is show you a quick demo that we've put together. And so using the new capabilities, what we're going to do is use the WUI application. If you've taken UiPath Academy, you've probably seen this application before. But what we're going to do is layer on input validation onto the form. And so we're going to basically notify the end user if they put in an invalid amount into the WUI application. And we can do that through the new form activities and triggers that are available in 23.4. And so let's go ahead and take a look at that. So as you can see here, I have a project running in Studio. I'm going to show a quick form where I can open up an instance of the WUI application. And you'll see here, oops, give me one second. And you'll see here, as I drag it along, there is an additional form that's going to appear at the bottom of this application. That's actually a form that's being rendered, that's docked to the application and moves alongside the application as I move it as well. And that's going to basically notify the end user if the values that they put into these cache in and on check fields are valid or not. So as you can see, as I minimize the application, the form will minimize as well. And when I bring it back, the form will come back as well. And so from an end user's perspective, they can't tell that this is not part of the application. And as you can see here, as I type in different values, the notification sent to the end user is going to change. And so what you see here, basically, oh, yeah, this always happens. So what you're basically seeing is we've used a click event. So when the user clicks on accept, we're going to block the event and validate whether or not these fields are valid. If they are invalid, then we block that event and we don't allow this fields to be submitted to the application. Now, if that validation is correct, there's no issues, then we basically repeat the event and allow the application to submit those values into the system. All right, you'll also see that if I open up another instance of the WUI application, now I have two instances of my application and also two forms that function separately from each other. And so you'll see here as I'm entering data into this other instance, the notifications that are sent to the end user correspond to that instance of the application. Likewise, the notifications in this instance of the application correspond to that instance. And so you can actually have multiple instances of the same form that correspond to instances of the application. And this is super powerful if you have multiple tabs relating to different sessions, and you can have forms that relate to each session independently of each other. And as you can see, I can close each of those. The respective forms will close as well. And then you can have an automation or a form that will close all instances of the application. And so that's just a general overview of some of the things you can do. As you can see, we've provided a lot of out-of-the-box capabilities that you can use to enrich the user experience that maybe you were able to do before, but it was a lot more difficult to perform. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we are doing and what we're trying to achieve here. And so the focus for these new attended capabilities was building responsive attended automations that were, most importantly, easily maintainable by the RPA developer. And this was achievable in the past, but harder to maintain. And so the current challenges that we spoke about in the beginning poll was performance, handling multiple forms, limited UI capabilities and functionality, monitoring multiple triggers and events in an attended world, asynchronous execution. So before, if you used a form activity, that was more or less a blocking activity and it would block the execution of your process. We've approached that differently where now it won't be a blocking activity. And then last but not least, complex data binding. So passing data in and out of a form was a little bit more difficult before, but we've provided more easy ways to do that. So we'll go through these one by one. So the first one I wanted to talk about is just improved performance overall. So starting in 22.10, we introduced the modern window projects. And so this really has improved robot startup time. If you migrate your projects from Windows Legacy to Windows Modern, you'll see a huge improvement in robot startup time. I highly recommend going ahead and migrating those projects over if you can, because then you're going to start seeing really good performance when it comes to your attended automations. The second thing we did was migrate forms to WebView 2. So these render and react much more quickly. And where you're really going to see huge performance improvements are when you have multiple forms on the screen at one time, as you saw in that previous demo. And then last but not least, we've overhauled the entire desktop triggers architecture. And so this applies to the old triggers that you would have seen, as well as a bunch of new triggers that I'll go through. And this allows you to monitor different events, but also react to hundreds of events with high performance. And so I have a quick video here of an automation built in the new Windows projects. As you can see, this is a ready to go automation. When I run it, I can start a timer or start the project here. And you'll see the robot has already started. and the windows render very, very quickly. And so this is a huge improvement when it comes to user experience in the attended world. The first thing your users are going to notice is, how long does an automation take to respond to me, but also begin. And so the quicker you can get to the element of wow or the responsiveness on the screen, the less likely your users are going to do something that's going to interrupt or cause an error in your automations. So the next thing that we addressed was forms as a first-class citizen in Studio. So now in Studio, beginning in 23.4, you can create forms directly in the Studio pane. It's now a new artifact in Studio. So if you went into Studio and you click new, before you can create a new type of workflow, right? Now you also have a new artifact called forms. So when you click on forms, you'll get a form designer similar to what you've seen before in the create form activity, but now it's going to be an actual artifact in your project structure. And so you would just drag and drop and build your form like you did before. But the beauty of this is now, because it's a separate artifact, as you can see here, .ui form, you can actually bring this into other projects if you wanted to use the same form, or you can put your form in a network drive and share that form across multiple projects. So it creates easier maintainability, but also collaboration across different forms, and also better consistency when it comes to your forms. You can easily move those project forms between different projects. These forms now are non-blocking. We're also going to apply this same form architecture to callouts, so the callouts will be super fast. When I say that they're non-blocking, you're going to have now a property in the form activities that will allow you to basically say, I want this form to show, but make it asynchronous, meaning that I want the execution of my project to continue. And so you can display a form, but also have your project continue execution. So no longer will your automation stop when a form renders on your screen. And then last but not least, we give you the capability to bring in your own HTML forms. And these would just be other files that you reference in your automation. And then you can have now a rich UI interface that's highly customizable. And you can also execute JavaScript using a script execution or execute script activity. And so no longer will you have to write complex JavaScript directly in maybe a button within the form activity. You can actually have JavaScript outside of the form and then just execute it within the form itself. And so a lot more easy to maintain there. All right, so the big one here that we haven't talked about yet is that we've changed the architecture of how you actually build attended automations. And so before, what you actually had was a project that more or less ran linearly or sequentially. And we know that in the attended world, most likely the way that your users interact with automations is more of an event-based architecture. And so they might click on something or open a file or open an application, and your automation should react in a certain way. And the way that you more or less did this in the past is you may have had a parallel activity with multiple monitor trigger events, right? Which would basically monitor and listen for each of those events. And so it's a little bit cumbersome because you still try to approach an event-based architecture from a linear or sequential perspective. And so what we've done now is overhaul the way that you can build attended automations so that you can more easily basically build things to this event-based architecture. And that begins with desktop triggers. And so in the future, or beginning in 23.4, you will most likely use these two new event triggers for 90% of the things that you want to listen for, or the events. The first one is the application event trigger. So this is going to be a trigger that you would set for anything that happens within a particular application. Let's say SAP, Concur, whatever you'd like. And you would map this trigger to a UI element. And then based upon that UI element, the event type will change. So if you have a field that's a text box, the event type will be on focus lost, text changed. And then if you say that you want to map it to a radio button or a checkbox, it might be state changed, right? Likewise with buttons, the event type will change. But the story is that you will have different events based upon the UI element type. And then when that event occurs on that UI element, then you can execute a set of actions, right? And that's more or less similar to the trigger scope or monitor events architecture that you've seen before. The other type of trigger that you're going to have is a form event trigger. And this is going to listen for any event that occurs within the forms that you create. And so you can have multiple forms in a project. So what you would do first is select a form and then the form event. This could be things such as minimize form, restore form, any buttons that you click in the form, as well as changing fields in the form. And of course, reacting to those events, you can perform a set of actions. We'll also have new system triggers that are available to you. You might see one called manual trigger. This is basically just to provide parity with Studio Web. So if you created something in Studio Web and you brought it into Studio, you would see a manual trigger there, but most likely you wouldn't use it directly in Studio Desktop. You'll have a repeat trigger. So this basically allows you to repeat a set of actions on a given interval, a time-based trigger, and a global variable trigger, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. But what you'll see here is these are sequences by themselves, and this is most likely the only thing in a workflow. What we've introduced now in the new attended capabilities are the concepts of triggered workflows. And so what basically happens here is that you have a workflow that's a sequence, and the first thing that's going to be in that workflow is a trigger, and then you'll have a set of actions that are performed after that trigger. If your workflow is set up this way, it's now considered a triggered workflow, and you're able to have that workflow be monitored, all of them, all at once. And so anytime any of those events occur, then the set of actions will be executed. And this is basically how it would work. You would have all these triggered workflows, as you can see, and you would still have a main workflow in your automation because there needs to be one single entry point. You might have something like showing a form or starting a process, and then you have a new activity called run local triggers. When that occurs, your automation will go into a wait state and then basically activate all of these triggered workflows to start listening for those events. And anytime a user performs one of these events or an event occurs, then the respective actions will be executed. You can set these triggers to be concurrent, sequential, one time, but the idea is that now you can create a triggered workflow once, and then have all of them listen for throughout your entire automation. And so as you can see, it's a lot more easily maintainable this way for you in your project structure to say, what are the events that are occurring and what are the things that are reacting to those events? And you can just create an automation that will go into a wait state and then start basically listening to all those events at once. Now, the question you probably have is, I'm in this wait state, how do I break out of it? And so in one of your triggered workflows, you'll probably have what we call stop local triggers, and that will break you out of your suspended state when you're listening to all these events, and then end execution of the automation. And as you can see here, most times that's probably a submit button or a close button for your form that's going to end the automation. And so this is just a high-level architecture overview of what an automation might look like if using this new capabilities. So I have an automation here that starts. I'm going to show a form, and then when the form starts, I'm also going to start listening for these local triggers, right? Because I want to be able to react to things that I do in the form itself. The form has multiple trigger types, so I can change a text field, I can check a box or change a radio selection. And then most likely when those occur, you'll probably want to get the form values and do something with them because they've changed from an end user perspective. You might also have a click button and you can get the values as well. And then if you close the form, we would probably want to just stop all triggers and end the automation. Now, let's say based upon this click trigger, I open an application like SAP, and then I can start listening for things that are happening in SAP. Let's say a text box changed. You can have one-to-one mapping from SAP to a field in your form if you wanted to, let's say, use the form as more of a mini menu of what's happening in SAP. Say you're a customer service agent and you want to just focus on the most important things between you and the customer on the other end. You can do that by using a form and then mapping it to an application that's a little bit more complex. And you can see here all of the other event types that you can perform in the application. So we've provided some examples of what you might want to do in reaction to these events. And it provides a lot of capabilities in terms of how you can now react to an application or a form and the events that occur within them. Before, let's say if you wanted to minimize a form when an application was minimized, you would have to do some pretty complex things with the out-of-the-box activities we provide. But you'll see here now, we have the capability to be a lot more reactive to the things that are happening on your screen. The one thing I did want to mention here is the introduction of what we call a global variable. And you'll see that in the previous slide, we talked about triggered workflows. So these triggered workflows, because they start listening and we execute them at any given time, there's no real way sequentially to say, how do I pass in an argument from the main workflow to one of these triggered workflows? And so we solved this by introducing what we call global variables. You would define these variables once at a project level, and then those variables are available to you throughout the entire project. And that's basically how you'd be able to pass data back and forth between, let's say, a main workflow and a triggered workflow. You know, the argument between using arguments and global variables is somewhat of an art. And so I've had this conversation with several people, but the end kind of prescriptive advice is if you have a variable that you're going to use in multiple workflows throughout your project, most likely you want to use a global variable for that. And for myself and for what we've built in the Attentive framework and these new capabilities, we basically create the config dictionary as a global variable, and then we just pass that throughout the entire project. So most likely you won't see the use of an argument. We just use a config dictionary. We update that throughout the automation to make sure that whatever data you're accessing is the most real-time data based upon the events occurring within your automation. All right, and so just as a recap, you'll see the challenges that we've outlined on the left-hand side. And when it comes to addressing these challenges, we've improved robot form and trigger performance, enhanced the form and trigger activities. You'll see that there are abundance of new form activities that you can actually perform in Studio. We have non-blocking forms and callouts, which will help immensely in terms of creating asynchronous automations. If you want to enrich the form experience that you have, you can bring in your own custom HTML forms. And then we obviously have global variables and simplified form bindings. So I didn't show it today, but in the new form activities, if you have a container component, you can just put all of your other components within it, and then you can pass a basically JSON object out of that container and then transform it into a config dictionary if you want. So you don't need to do complex one-to-one mapping for all of your form components. Just put everything into a container component and then pull out that container component as a JSON object, and you can access it that way. And that works bidirectionally. So you can take all the data out of a form at once, and then you can push it all the way in all at once as well. And then last but not least, we do have that event-based architecture that you saw. So this is going to be super helpful when it comes to managing and maintaining your projects. And then just understanding if I perform something in my automation, how is it going to respond to it? And so it's a lot easier as well to explain to your customers or your end users when you're building automations. All right, so just covering next steps, the automation that I did show at the beginning of my portion of this session is available to you via email after this session. So go ahead and download it. Like I mentioned, you might need 23.4 to be able to run this, which will be available shortly. But we also have a preview version of these capabilities that you can download and utilize as well. Don't miss the next Dev Dive series. There's a link here where you can access all of the next sessions. But next month, we will have a session starting at 9 a.m. Eastern time to rapidly automate APIs and build custom connectors with integration service. And then the following month, we will have a session to unleash the full potential of your automations with generative AI. I'm going to be joining that session. I hope you guys can too. I think it's going to be really, really exciting. So with that, I'll turn it over to Christina, and we have a survey really quickly, and then we can open up to Q&A.
It's us inviting them to a survey. Actually, we won't hold it now. Thank you very much, Duan. So just for everyone to know what this is about, I think most of you might have already heard about it, the State of the Automation Professional Survey. It's a survey done every year by UiPath community. Of course, this year we switched from RPA developer to automation professional since the roles and profiles in the industry also change. It's pretty important, this survey, for our whole community, for you as well. The results will be published by us and they will be free of charge. And you will get to see a lot of information on job profiling, role profiling, salary basis, work conditions, and everything that changes in the industry. So the idea is, as much data we manage to gather from the survey, as much you will benefit from it. So I strongly encourage you. It will take probably about 7 minutes. If you have them, please scan the QR code. I will give you also now the link in the chat. Keep the link and take the survey, please, for our entire community. And the results should be published sometime in June. You can wait for the results. Let us know if you plan to take it. If you have seen this survey before, the results from last year, can also share those in the chat. Please take the survey. And now I think we can, if you manage to already take the previous links from the chat, the one for the automation and the one for the dev dive series. So I would copy now all the links you need from the chat. Don't forget them. And we can move into live Q&A. Let's see a bit here. Okay. Let's see who wants to ask any question for Juan or for Robert. I think most of the chat questions were already answered by Radu, from what I see. And we should have. You can unmute yourselves also. Let me know if you have problems in unmuting yourselves.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hey.
Will there be an email trigger for attended automations?
Can you say that one more time? You said, will there be a manual trigger?
Email trigger.
Yeah, so I think Tuan showed there's a list of the traditional triggers that have not gone away. So by email trigger, you mean an Outlook trigger?
Yes, when a certain email comes,
Yeah.
I want to do something following it.
Yeah, that is present and available.
You can do that
It's already
today.
available.
Yeah, you can do that today with the Outlook mail messages trigger. It's not ported over to the new architecture just yet, but it will be eventually. We wanted to focus on most of the desktop application or desktop events first, but we're going to bring over these other triggers as well. We would consider those more or less like API-based triggers, but we will bring those over as well.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, William.
Hello.
Hey.
Hey, I have a few questions after working with this framework. I'm going to look away because I've listed them down on the other machine, so please bear with me. The form cannot be moved, right, once it's set up, right? I mean, is that correct, or is that a problem on my end?
No, the form can be moved. It requires a little bit more, I would call, finesse right now. You can use the change form properties to change the location to basically move the form around. We are going to simplify that hopefully in the future by allowing you to dock a form to an application. It's a little more complex because you have to understand like the boundaries of the application that you're looking at, but it will be possible. It is possible, and it will be easier.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking that is I did not associate that. I'm building a forms application as a standalone application, not associated with any desktop application. So the idea is to start the automation and the form comes up and I want to interact with an API or an integration service connector, things like that. It's working. I mean, I got it working, it's fine, but I saw some of these things that, and the other thing is if I disable the, visible in taskbar, or if I disable that window frame, then the visible in taskbar does not work, right? There's no indicator of the form showing up on the taskbar. If I is if I disable the Windows frame. Is that the intended function?
I have to double check. I think
Yeah.
you can make so that it shows up as its own like tile in your taskbar, right? And then it should be separate from actually having like a title bar. Are you saying that if you don't show it up in the taskbar, then the title bar doesn't show up as well?
No, the other way. If you do not enable the frame around the window that shows the title icon of the form and the name of the form, it does not show on the taskbar, even if you enable show in taskbar.
Got it. Got it.
Okay, so that's the other one. And then this is the major thing. This might be impacting how people build these, and I think we must make this obvious or make this as some kind of a focal point in the documentation. We are putting forms in folders, right? I started with a parent form and a child form. And then I said, because the child form, obviously it's a parent-child relationship, I put both of them in the same folder. But then by the time I was done with all my triggers, the whole thing just grew. And I wanted to have the parent form and the child form in separate folders so that I can better identify what the triggers are or the XAML files are associated with each form. But the problem is, if I make that change later, right, all my show form and set form values, get form values will fail, will break, because when you launch the form, you're tying that path of the folder / the name of the form to it. And when it changes, that doesn't dynamically change. So what happens is all the dictionaries that I have built up in the set form values or get form values, they just disappear, right? I think this might be a major thing when it comes to if somebody realizes that they have not structured their forms well in the late stage of their automation development lifecycle or future maintenance, it's going to break everything if they decide to move the forms from one folder to the other. Maybe there must be some way to get around that, because I'm not able to do it now. I've got like 5 or 10 files in one folder, and I'm trying to move it to another. Unless I rework the whole thing, I cannot change it.
Now, this is really good feedback, and we'll definitely take a look at it. Do you know right now, like, does the same limitation apply to just workflows? Have you looked at that? Because I know that if I like rename a workflow, then it will automatically propagate that.
No, the workflows reconfigure themselves, variables, workflows, because I'm calling some workflows in the trigger event as well in the trigger XAMLs, but it's only the form activities, launch form, set and get, where you're saying, okay, show form, it is folder name / form, and that breaks immediately. It doesn't auto resolve. And even that is a minor problem compared to everything disappearing from your dictionary, because your dictionary just evaporates like this. You got to go back and set everything again, which might be a problem if you have a complex form or a large form.
Totally agree. Thanks. I appreciate that feedback.
And then there is this problem of delayed error resolution. So here's what I did. I had a control on a form, which is a text box, and then I removed it. After several iterations, I completely removed it. And then when I came back, all the associated trigger files started showing that that control is not available in the form dictionary. But I had gone in and changed every one of the set, get, and launch form or show form activities to remove that field, right? But those errors did not resolve, and the trigger files on the left were all showing red check marks, right? The red error flags on them. The only way I could resolve them was I had to close the project and restart, because I was not able to. I looked everywhere. I went through like 2 or 3 iterations, and I said, am I missing something? But I was not missing anything. But then I shut down my project and I restarted it, the errors went away.
Got it.
Yeah, so the dictionaries are not configured as we start removing controls from the form interface. And when we come back to the code, it's not almost instant. I think it we need to restart to reconfigure those form dictionaries.
Got it. You're saying the errors appeared in the triggered workflows, right? That previously referenced the now
Correct.
deleted. Okay.
Correct. But even after I went in, brought up every one of those dictionaries and removed those missing form fields and saved my changes, those errors never went away. So it leaves you with an impression that you missed something somewhere. But that's not truly the case. There is no error. You removed all the errors, and yet it shows there is an error in your project somewhere. But then I said, okay, maybe I should restart, because I was absolutely sure that I've removed all of those missing references. But then I restarted the project, the errors went away.
Got it.
Right.
We don't have much time left.
How
yeah,
I wish I
Andy?
came before you, because you're and then I like the caption in your chat. I am always right. So my question goes to
Sorry.
Nyungen. I hope that's the right way to pronounce your name.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just wanted to know, because personally I haven't worked with the attended automation framework, but I wanted to know whether the attended automation framework, does it have a fuse of the root framework in it, or you have to integrate when you are to use the attended automation, you have to integrate it with the root framework, or it has its own way of how it does the exception handling and the rest? That's my question.
Yeah, great question. So we built the attended framework based on the RE framework. If you open it up, you'll see that we use state machines. It's a little bit different in terms of like how we've set it up, but the overall architecture is more or less the same. You won't be able to do things like batch processing or sequential processing, but we separated it out so that if you wanted to do that, you could. It's just not there out of the box. We've more or less built an architecture where a form is shown to the end user. The user is able to perform things within a form and execute logic within that form and after the form, right? And then afterwards, once that logic is successfully completed or ended in error, we display another form to the user, notifying them what actually happened. And from there, they can actually repeat the automation to go back to the previous input form. And that's kind of the architecture that we've laid out. So it's fairly simple, but it gives the end user a consistent experience across all of the automations that we've built, for at least the ready to go automations. And that's really important, as Robert mentioned, of like giving the end user a consistent experience so they know exactly what to expect throughout an automation.
All right. It's very clear. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Anyone else for live questions? If this is your last chance, as we are already over 5 minutes, but I think maybe 5 minutes more maximum. If there are any other questions.
I put one in the chat. I think it's more of a, I think more of a documentation thing than a problem.
Yeah, I would like to ask something. I had you, to be honest, I didn't use the framework of attended that provided from UiPath. I were using framework and some state machine that our company use, and we create some own framework. Is there any chance I could, or any recommend you can give me that I could try to change our framework to the UiPath attended framework? Any practice? Because like it's my first time I look up to the framework, and it's a little bit confusing to me. How can I change my my current now working and running process as attended to the new attended framework from UiPath?
Yeah, we have a marketplace listing for the attended framework. On that marketplace listing, I detail out some videos of how you could transition some of your existing projects into the attended framework. But I think my contact information is also listed there. So I would definitely give that a shot. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you for your support and your time.
Yeah.
And even for your session.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, or should we close? Okay, I think we are cool. I see there are many thank yous in the chat, and yes, thank you, Robert. Thank you, Nguyen. And don't forget, guys, before you drop off, take the links we shared previously in the chat, the one for the State of the Automation Professional Survey and also the one for the Dev Dive series. So you can have them. The recording and the deck will be available tomorrow on event link, and you will also receive an email notification. And thank you all for joining us today. We hope you really enjoyed it, and see you next month for Dev Dives number 5 in May. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
so
everyone.
much.
Thank
See
you.
Bye.